Hello, welcome back to the Rainy Forge. Sorry it's been a little while since I've posted a video. It was really busy Christmas season, and so far this year just everyone decided to put in custom orders for Christmas instead of buying what I already had, which is totally fine. Gives me a chance to dig in some really cool knives, but been super busy getting inventory back up after Christmas and just getting everything going here at the forge. So for this video I decided a little project, and I wanted to show and take you guys along on the journey. So a couple years back, when I was just starting out, I had a buddy of mine who I used to play video games with, and he lives up in Nova Scotia, and he wanted a nice custom chopper knife to take with him when he does some lumberjack work, and he wanted it made out of an old pickaxe. So I went ahead and I took one of the old pickaxe heads I had and chopped the pick off of it and made a big camp chopper out of it, and I'll see if I can't throw a picture of that knife in here. And so today I wanted to, now that I have about 3 years more experience under my belt, I wanted to basically do the same thing, make a nice little pickaxe knife. And I'm not really sure what exactly the shape's going to be for it. A lot of times I just kind of hammer on the steel and see what it wants to do and have it give me ideas and go from there. So here we go. I've got this nice old rusty pickaxe, and not all old tools were made with good steel, even if they're old American tools. A lot of times they didn't use the best steel to make the tools, mass production and everything. So the first thing that we got to do is spark test it, and what we're looking for is nice short sparks with a lot of little tiny sparks that come off, and that'll show me that it's got a good amount of carbon in it and it's good hardenable steel, and it'll make for a good knife. So we'll go ahead and spark test it and see what we got. Alright, so I got one of my 36 grits belts here, and I'm just going to flicker on and let's throw some sparks. Well, I wish I saw a little bit more action out of those sparks, but I think it'll do the trick. So we'll go throw her in the forge, heat her up, and start hammering her out. And it's taking forever to heat this thing up. Lot of steel to move. Let's get her going. So I'm using the peen here to move that metal, really get it to spread out flat. It's a lot of steel here to move by hand, and she's heating up wicked slow because of the really big fat area in here. So just give it time and get her hot and work it out. She's getting a little warm. I'll have to switch over to my glove here in a sec. Starting to flatten out a bit. I'll keep working. I got my Mjolnir here with my Thor's rune on it. Does it make you a better hammerer? Maybe. starting to flat out a bit. Man, it's a lot of steel to heat up. She just doesn't want to warm up there. Alright, I really gave the forge some time to warm up. Let's see if this goes a little easier. Oh yeah. Just gotta really get some force into those hammer blows. Just really move that steel. It's a lot to squish down. So I pulled the pickaxe out of the forge here, and so much of the heat is just getting sucked out through the hole in the head here. So what I'm going to do is let this cool down and take it over to my chop saw and chop off the pick part. And that's just going to make it a million times easier to heat up and work with. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and that'll probably be another day, but we'll continue the video on, and I'll be with you in a sec. So it took way longer than it should have, but I finally got my little bit of pickaxe here. So I'm just waiting for the forge to heat up. We're going to throw it in there, get it nice and hot, hammer out a knife. And while I was working on that and I was waiting, I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And because that piece of pickaxe has such a long tang on it, I figured I'm going to do a hidden tang knife with a nice guard on it. I have this little guard right here left over, and I'm not sure if I'm going to use that or if I'm going to make something, buy something. But I also have a nice little chunk of antler here that a buddy gave me from a deer that he got that he couldn't eat. Unfortunately, it was diseased or something. He couldn't eat it, but he got the antlers off of it, gave them to me. I already used one, and I've got this other one here. So I think that's what I'm going to use. So throw that little bit of pickaxe in the forge, get it nice and heated up, and I'll be with you then. Gonna use, if I can actually hold on to this thing, I'm gonna use the peen, or the cross on the hammer here, on the horn of the anvil, to really draw this steel out. When you have equal force on both sides, it definitely helps a lot. Really moving that material. And I've got a lot of material to move. This thing's really hard to hold on to as well. But we want to keep it nice and hot. The hotter it is, the easier it's going to be to move. So just keep back and forth in the forge and just keep it hot. Flatten it out a bit. Give me a handle to hold on to. See it there? A little bit of a handle there, so should make this a little bit easier. Now I can use that horn and really have a good amount of force to really stretch this steel out as best I can. Flatten it. No power hammer here, just sheer force. Although I'd love a power hammer one day. So I'm getting her flattened out. We're almost there. We're still fairly thick, but we're getting there. We're probably at about maybe ½ inch thickness or so. So I'm just continuing to get that material moved and flattened out. And as I move her here, and she kind of has an interesting shape going on. So I'm just going to kind of run with it. A lot of the times when I'm not working on a piece that's been pre-designed out, I let the steel kind of do the talking and tell me what it wants to do. So we've got kind of this big, like a wedge shape going on here. And I think I can get this rounded out nice and kind of really get this rounded out nice and kind of make this into almost like a kukri bolo machete style blade. So I'm going to keep flattening her out. I want to get her down to about 1/4 inch or so, and then I'll really start working on the shape. But yeah, I'm thinking some sort of like a bolo machete kukri shape, hidden tang, maybe full tang. I don't know. We'll see where we get to, how much steel I have to work with. It seems like I'm going to have a lot of steel, so it might be a full tang, you know. We'll see. We'll go with it and see where it goes. All right, back in the forge. So I started moving her out a bit. I got that tip nice and rounded here. And I'm using this hammer now. And it's because the head of the hammer there's got a little bit more roundness to it. And what I want to do here is really put a nice belly on the knife. Oh, there she goes. Always fun trying to do this and hold on to the knife at the same time. But we'll just slowly but surely get that nice little belly on there. See there, we're starting to get it. Clean this off here. So we got that little bit of a belly going on here now. And so we'll just keep that going. And I'm going to keep her hot and running, and I'll get back to you in a little bit after I get some of that shape done. Alright, and go ahead and start this edge bevel. Now I might have to switch to a different hammer, we'll see. Just draw this out as best I can. Work both sides. Try and keep my knife at a slight angle, and that'll help avoid the knife from kind of curling back on itself like a banana. The kukri shape helps a lot with that too. It doesn't want a banana as much because of the way the knife is shaped with the physics behind how you're hitting it. So that's nice, but definitely got to keep an eye on that. Make sure she doesn't banana, and just keep that knife slightly angled up so when I hit it, all that force goes nice and down and not back at all. Alright, I'm switching over to my other hammer. We'll finish this edge off. Get it pretty thin. Nice tall bevel. And there you can see she is starting to banana a little bit. So I'm just going to chase after that real quick. Throw it back in the forge. Alright, so I've got that bevel pretty much forged out how I want it. And before I make sure she's all nice and straight, the last thing I want to do is I'm going to put a little bit of texture in there. So I've got this hammer with a really small tip on it. And I'm just going to go along and just put some little hammer textures in here. And just make sure I do both sides of it. And I really want to get kind of the edge of the tip of this hammer to really put some good indents in here. Just kind of switch it up a little bit here and there, make it interesting. Just give it a little bit of texture here. So I usually do this with my round hammer, but for this one, I want to give those almost like fish scales. Let's see if that camera will focus on here. Come on, you. Alright, well you can kind of see the little fish scaling that's going on there. So we're going to stick it in the forge and just keep working that side, flip it over, do the other side as well. Make everything nice and even, and then straighten it out really nice and make sure there's no warps or wiggles or anything going on. And then she stays in the forge and gets annealed. So I'm going to do all of that, and then I'm going to get back to you once she's all cool and show you what she looks like. Alright, so here is our rough forged shape, and I've actually gone ahead and marked this up with chalk. And so I'm going to take it to the grinder and get that final shape done how I want it, and put a rough edge on there. And so I have my my little guard here, and this is actually going to fit on here really nice. So I just got to grind away on that tang, make sure she slides up and sits right about there. And then I'm going to take this tang, shorten it a bit, make it nice and thin so it's a little bit easier to work with. And then I'm still deciding whether or not I want to use that antler or not. It's really hard to use antler when you have a really big thick tang. Just taking out material can be just a pain in the butt because you can't really cut it in half and chisel out the inside. You kind of have to just use a drill bit and clean that out. I've done it before. If you want, you can check out my 2 reindeer antler knives and see kind of the process of how that's done. But as I'm working on it, I'm going to decide whether or not that's what I go with. But we'll take it over the grinder and get this shape nice and finalized. Liking that a lot. Now I just got to work on the tang and get that guard to slide on there how I want it. I got the tang ground nice, so my guard slides on there perfect. And when I go to fit it on there for good, it'll get slammed in there really nice, and put a bunch of JB weld in there to keep it in place, keep it from rattling around at all, although it's a really good tight fit right now. I'm going to not do the antler because I want to put a pin in here, and then that will help hold this guard really good, nice and tight. That pin construction, and this knife can really be used as a really good chopper and can just, you know, beat the hell out of it and have no issues whatsoever. With antler handles, a lot of the times, because of how hard it is to take material out, if you have like a really big thick tang like this and you try and, you know, clean all that material out with an antler handle and you go to chop something with it, you end up kind of busting through the side because of how fragile and how thin it gets. So we're going to go for a nice piece of oak. I've got a bunch of oak, and it's nice, good, solid stuff. And I've actually also got, which I might use here, I've got this block of resin. I might use that. That might actually look pretty cool. So we'll see when I get to it whether I go with just oak or I go with this resin. Once I get to it, whatever I'm feeling like, whatever the knife kind of is telling me what it wants to do. But for now, we're going to take it over back to the grinder and get that bevel done on there. And I'm going to take it to 60 grit before I heat treat it, just because once I heat treat it, I'm probably going to want to go through and do a lot more finished grind work. So there's no sense in taking it in anything finer than 60 when I'm going to have to go back to 60 anyway. So back to the grinder we go. Oh, there we go. I got the rough edge done, and I'm just going to take it to 60 grit now. Alright, that'll do it. So there she is. And not the prettiest grind in the world, but as I said, that'll get cleaned up nice after she's hardened. That's just to take most of the material off. And so before I bring her out and harden her, I'm just going to drill a hole for a pin right there. First in the Park 50, and now we'll give it some finishing hardness, just on that edge if I can. Okay. So this is a brine, basically just really salty water. And that allows it to quench a little bit slower, helps prevent cracking. Let's see. Very slight warp. Let's see how she is. Oh, she's skating nice. Alright. If I can't take that slight warp out of there. It's not much, it's just the tiniest little bit. So I'm just going to clamp her up and see if I can't take that out of there. Alright, so she's been hardened and tempered. And I went ahead and cleaned her up with my wire wheel. So now we're going to go through and take it from the 60 grit that we're at all the way down to an 800 grit and then hit it on my buffing wheel. So to start, we go to 120 and then a 220 and then a 400, and then I'm going to hit it with some sandpaper and go to the 800 and polish it really nice. Well, alright, so I've got my knife here polished up really nice. Nice and shiny. And we're going to slide this guard on here. See how she's going to sit. So that's what we're going to look like here. And so the next step is this handle. So I think I've decided I'm going to go with a block of resin here that I made. And it's got walnut set in it. So that's going to look really, really pretty when that gets sanded down and polished up. So that's going to sit here on the handle. It's going to, there we go. So that's going to be like that. And now I just got to drill the hole for the pin and then design out kind of what shape I want to do with this resin block here. And cut that shape out, cut that shape in half, use my nice mill press here to clean out the space for the tang, pop the pin in, glue it all together, and polish the handle up. So I'm going to do a little bit of prep work on this block and get it nice and clean, and I'll get back with you shortly. Alright, so I have my block of resin here, nice and flat. And I put a chunk of G10 for a spacer here in the back, just to have a nice little accent there. And I always try and use all the little cut-offs and scraps of material that I have whenever I can. Just saves material, and also artistically speaking, a lot of the time when you use little bits of scraps and whatnot, you end up coming up with something even cooler than you could have designed. So I always try and do that, makes things interesting. So now, I've got my knife here with the guard on it. And I'm going to slam it up nice and tight on this resin. And I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here. And I'm going to sit it at the top of the resin here. I'm going to decide, I like this wood. I really like this wood. I think, do it this way. So I really, really like that swirl on the wood there. So I'm going to put this up here. And then what I do is, with the pen, I put a little mark where my hole is going to go. And then instead of actually drilling the hole right there, I'm actually going to bring that hole back a little bit and drill it there. So once I drill that, I can take material off from the front of my block here to make sure that that knife sits in there really, really good and snug and tight. If I were to drill my hole exactly where I have it marked, then I run into the problem where in flattening this and making this super straight and flush, if I take a little bit too much material off, then the knife doesn't sit nice and tight and flush. So I'd rather have a little bit of extra material and slowly sand down to make sure everything's nice and tight. So I'm going to go ahead and drill that hole and then mark where the tang is and then kind of figure out what shape I want to go with this handle. So now with this hole here, I'll line this up as close as I can get it, and as I said, it's not going to line up perfect because I want to remove material to make that sit nice and flush. But I'm going to go ahead and with a Sharpie, I'm going to mark where that tang's going to sit. Bring it out a little bit further. So now I know where my tang's going to be. So now I can kind of design the shape of the handle I want to go with. So I kind of want this to be, let's see, kind of want a nice round at the back here. and have it come in. Nice little handle groove here. Come up and go back in. So something kind of like that. Make this a little bit taller here. So the final shape might change a little bit as I go, but roughly, generally speaking, I know kind of what I'm going to work with here. And I'll line this up again so I can see where the guard's going to sit. I want to give myself extra material because, as I said, it's always better to have extra material than be exact, because you can always sand down to exactly where you want to be. So I'll follow this line again and just give myself a little bit of extra material here. So there we go. So I want to make sure I know that it's that outer line, so we'll scratch that. Alright, so now the next step that we do is I take my ruler here and my pen, and I try and get as close to the center as I can. Nice straight line. Mark that. And then we'll go over to the bandsaw and cut this in half, and then mill out both sides of where the tang's gonna sit. So I got these two milled out, put them together, and a knife slides in here really nice. It's a little bit looser than I want, but it'll be fine. There'll be plenty of epoxy in there, and it's not super loose. So go ahead, and I'm gonna put this pin in here, connect the two together, apply epoxy on both sides, push them together, pin in, clamp it together, and let it dry. So handle's glued together. I got my knife in there. I removed a little material so that hole lines up perfectly. I've got her exactly where I want her, and I've got my shape drawn out here. So now it's just kind of a slow and tedious process of getting that shape down, matching it up nice with my guard, and just making everything look really, really nice. So we'll go over to the grinder and the bandsaw and get that handle done. So we're starting to get that rounded, nice rounded shape there. So when that guard sits on there, it's nice and flush. So like I said, it's just a lot of grinding, a lot of work. So here's the rough handle shape, and I'm actually going to go ahead and grind a little bit more out of here, make these a little bit taller, and then I'm going to drill a hole for a lanyard. And what I do for the lanyard holes, instead of paying a bunch of money for brass or steel tubing, is I just use old shell casings. So I drill the hole the right size, stick that in there, cut off both ends, and there you go, lanyard hole. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, do a little bit more grind work, and I'll get back to you. Alright, so I got the handle all polished up, ready to go on. So I'm going to go ahead and throw a bunch of epoxy on here, get that in there, throw that pin in, do a little bit of finish polish on the handle, and work on the sheath. Alright, so the knife is done. I just got to put a final edge on it. I put a little secondary bevel on there, and I just got to take it to my sharpening stones and finish her off real quick. But next step in the process is to make a sheath. So the way that I do sheaths I have a couple paper sheaths that are already cut out, but for this we'll have to do something custom. So I like to give myself a good inch and a quarter or so of extra material for my stitching. And then I'll just take a pencil and kind of draw the rough shape of what I want here, keeping that inch and a quarter of extra space here. And then what's key for kukris is you need to kind of flare it out a little bit at the end. And that gives you a little bit of extra room for when you pull the knife out of the sheath. It has somewhere to go. So that's going to hit right there. So I want to give it a little bit more room. Right there. So when this goes in the sheath, it'll curl around nice and come in. So we'll put her there. Draw this line out a little bit further. And I'm just going to have it keep going. So when I do the spine here, it's going to meet nice. We'll keep that line going nice. So that's going to be our rough shape here for the sheath. So that'll sit there on the end, and that gives us a pretty good amount of room to come in and out of the sheath. So I think I want to extend this up a little bit and then have it come back in, and something for the back. So what I'm going to do is cut out that shape and transfer it over onto a new piece of paper so I can fold everything over and make a nice thing. So I have a new piece of paper here, and as I said, we'll transfer this on here. I want a little bit more space here. Let's see where this guard's gonna sit. Really want this nice and low riding when you wear it on the hip, so it's not sticking up too high. So I'm going to go ahead and trace this out again. Alright, so as I said, I want the front of the sheath to kind of come down, something like that. Yeah, I like that shape a lot, if you can see that. So that's going to be the front. And then for the back, I try and keep a nice tight line and then have the back just come up. Make sure I have enough room for my my belt loop here. And hopefully with our guard here, hopefully that when that sits in there, I think I'm going to square it off with the guard, and that'll look really nice instead of round. Square this off. There we go. And then I'm going to bring this up a little bit more. Alright, so that's going to be the shape for the sheath. And now what I do is I fold the paper over. Keep that nice folded edge here. So where that fold is going to be where the fold is for my leather. So anywhere where it's not attached is where stitching's gonna have to go eventually. So all of this right here is gonna be stitching. And then I'm gonna have stitching coming up here and terminating about right there. And then for this one, I always like for a kukri, because it's sliding in and out of the sheath a lot. And it has a very good tendency of cutting your stitching, so I always put a rivet pin right here. I like one right below the belly here. And then we'll put one here at the tip. More for aesthetics than anything, because you're not pushing through this sheath, but that'll look good. So there we go, there's our sheath. And I kind of know what I'm going to do tooling wise, but we'll get there when I get there. So next step is I'm going to cut this out, put it on some leather, cut that out, and I'll be back with you once all that's done. So I just wanted to give a quick tip for anyone watching that's getting into leatherwork, wants to get into leatherwork, whatever. If you're making sheaths and you're using this technique, where you use either paper or cardboard as a template, and you trace it out on the leather. Always remember, if the leather is down, you want your back on the left side. Leather's up, you want it on the right. But I always trace with the leather down, and that's just to help me so I don't mess up the top. If my pen goes under the stencil or whatever, I don't have pen marks on the leather where it's going to be showing. And this on the underneath is fine because it can be covered by dye, or I can go through with some sandpaper and clean it off if it's bad. But I've never had to do that, so now I just go ahead and trace this out. So here's the leather sheath cut out, and the first step in the process here is I have my calipers, and we just score the outside. And this gives me my space for my black strip of stitching. And then anywhere that I couldn't get to with the calipers, I go back through with pencil. So these lines here at the bottom, just extend those out. And make sure you're using pencil, because pen don't come off. And you want the pencil to be hidden, so here's our lines. And then, yeah, I think for this one I'm just going to have them terminate together as a triangle instead of cutting it right here. And then up here at the top, need some pencil. I'll have this come down as well. So there's that. Now I go through with my little gouging tool and cut all of this out. And I'll also usually keep my finger right on the outside of the sheath, kind of guide everything along. There's actually a little metal part that came with the gouge tool to do that instead of your finger, but that takes just an annoying amount of time to adjust and set up, so I've just gotten to the point where I can just do it with my finger. And so there we go, all cut out. So now I'm going to go ahead and wet the whole thing down with some warm water, let it sit for a second, and start tooling. So I have my leather here that's been soaking, and I have my little stamp. This is a flower stamp, or a leaf stamp. And I love using this one on the edge, and if you overlap it, it looks really cool, and you can't tell what it was. I love when you have a stamp that's used for one thing and you use it slightly different, and it just gives you a really, really cool texture or pattern that was not what was intended in the first place. A lot of the times I'll use letter and number stamps and turn them sideways or upside down, and that'll make for some really cool patterns. The R in particular, when I use the R, kind of gives it like a rune look, and that's really, really cool. But this one's pretty straightforward and simple. You just kind of overlap them a little bit. So I'm not going to show you me doing the whole thing, because that just takes a very tedious amount of time. But you can kind of see what we're going with here. And as long as you keep your leather damp, you'll get a much better stamp, and also the thicker the leather, the better. This stuff is about a 1/4 inch thick. So there you go. Keep working on this. So I have the whole thing tooled. It looks really nice. Next step, we got another tool here, and we're going to use this one next. So what I have to do for this is I have to set out just a little bit of a grid for myself to make sure I'm keeping things nice and straight. I'm going to have this set at a little bit of an angle. I want to have it follow this line here. So just got to draw a couple lines on here, make a nice little grid. It's very, very easy when you're doing any kind of a texture stippling pattern that's not on the edge to veer off. And if you're not paying attention and you keep going, then you look down and it just looks terrible. So we set that little grid up, and now I just go through and make sure I stay on that grid. I want them to come down here. So we'll start a row here, kind of go against my grid, but keeping it there. Then once you have that first row, it's so much easier after that. But there's that first row, and we're just going to bring that all the way down and cover this whole section of the sheath. Alright, I got that fully stamped, and I'm just going to let her sit here and dry for a couple hours, and then we're going to put some dye on there. So the sheath has been let to dry for a little while, and pull as much of that moisture out of there as I can. And the first thing I'm going to do is I have this antiquing paste. And so what this stuff will end up doing is getting right into the crevices of my tooling here. Let's see if you can see that as I rub this in. And I just want to keep loading it up and get it as good in there as I can into the tooling. And so when I go back through with my leather dye later on, all the little detailing here will be highlighted by this black paste. So it just kind of, I just keep loading it up and rubbing it in there. And this takes a little while, but it makes a huge difference in the final sheath. And I don't do this with all of my sheaths just because it takes a little while, it's a little tedious. And I don't have a ton of this paste. And if I did it for every sheath, I'd run out of it really quick and have to buy more, and that's just a pain in the butt and more money I gotta spend. So I usually just save it for anything that's got a lot of detail that I really want to pull, or like this. any of my more higher end knives for the avid knife collector. So I'm just going to finish this off, and then what I do is I go through with a wet cloth and wipe off as much of the extra as I can. And it doesn't really darken the final sheath at all in the center, but I still clear as much of that off as I can before I go through with my nice burgundy dye. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this off, and I'll get back to you when I'm ready to throw some dye on there. So here's how she looks after I've cleaned her off a bit. And we're going to go ahead and start with black. And that's going to go just the border of this sheath. So I just want to really take my time, do this in one nice clean motion. And I find that's how you get nice crisp edges. If you go too slow and too meticulous, a lot of times you run over that edge. So you just want to trust your body. Your muscles know exactly what they're doing to stay on those lines. There you go. Finish these lines off. So I usually do 2 coats of the black. I'll throw this first coat on and then let it dry for a while, and then put another coat on while I'm working on cutting out my belt loop for the top. Doing a few little touch-ups as I go here. The most annoying part is always these little crevices and points where it's just super easy to go over your border. So you just got to be really careful and just nice and light, and the dye will just want to sit on there, using capillary action to kind of keep it up, and surface tension to keep it up. Doing a few little touch-ups as I go here. And then I'm going to grab a dark brown and do the inside here and the back with this dark brown. You can see with that antiquing paste that I put on there, you can kind of see that popping through a bit in the details. And then also it kind of prevents our dye from sitting in, which is totally fine. It will eventually. You just kind of have to let it sit for a little bit. So that brown will lighten up a little bit when I go to buff the leather later on, but generally speaking, that's the color that it's going to be when it's done. So now I just go ahead and flip it over carefully and just coat the back as well in that dark brown. So there we go. There's the back done, there's the front done, and I'm just going to let that sit again for a couple hours and dry. I might throw it in my kiln on warm for a little bit. That usually does a good job. And once that's done, then I go ahead and polish it up with my buffing wheel, and I'll have my little belt loop that I'm going to cut out and dye, and that'll get glued on the top. Everything gets glued together, stitching on it, and then the whole thing gets sandwiched and glued and stitching down the side. So I'm going to do a bunch of that by myself, and a bunch of it I'll show you, so you'll see little bits here and there. Eventually I'm going to do a full make of a sheath for you guys that are interested in seeing the entire process, all the boring tediousness of it. But for now, we'll just fast forward to wherever we get to. So here's our sheath. I glued it up and let it sit overnight. And now I'm going to go through and clean up these edges, make everything nice and flush and looking really good. And then we'll mark for our threading and our rivet pins. So here's how she looks with my rivets in there. Now I just got to go over to my drill press and drill out my holes for the stitching. So for my stitching, I like to drill one and then leave two, and then one, then leave two, then one. And that seems to be a pretty good spacing where they're not too close together and you're not too far apart. Alright, so I have all the holes drilled, and the next step that I want to do before I stitch is I have a little, my little tool, punch tool for putting divots to, on the steel to drill handle pins. I take this tool and I go to all of my holes on my sheath and I just give it a little tap. And what that does is it puts in a little divot and it makes for more aesthetically pleasing stitching. As you can see, a difference between my holes that I punched down and the ones just drilled. And you can see it makes a huge difference. You don't have that little bit of leather that's been pushed up from the drill going through it. And as that stitching pulls tight and sits in there, it also looks a lot better. It looks more intentional than just holes being drilled. So I'm going to do that for all these holes and then talk a little bit about stitching. Alright, so stitching. Pretty straightforward. I like to saddle stitch all of my sheaths, and that method helps that if one of your stitches gets nicked or cut, the whole thing doesn't start to unravel on you, and you can usually just take a lighter and just melt the ends and press it down and it'll be good instead of having to redo the whole thing. So the way that I measure out my string, very important, stretch it out to the entire length of your stitching, and this one's going to be done in segments, so between the rivets. So we'll start with this first segment and stretch out your length, and you do that once, twice, 3 times, and that'll usually just get you there with a little bit of extra. So I like to do 4 just to give myself plenty of extra string to work with, so when I get to the end I'm not fighting myself to tie that final knot. So I'm going to go ahead and set my needles up and be right back with you. Alright, so I have my needles and we'll go ahead, push it through. So what I like to do is hold my string up and make sure that they're both about the same length once I have it through that first hole. And then I'll do 1 stitch. So the top goes through, and the bottom. Check them again, make sure they're still even. Good, and then just kind of pull that tight, just nice light tight bit. And if you're using any kind of a waxed thread or artificial sinew or real sinew, so this is just a thread that's been waxed. And what that wax does is it kind of helps hold that form of that stitch and keep it nice and tight. Now this stuff will loosen up a little bit more than flat sinew will,
but it's really, really, really hard to find good stuff in any color other than brown. And I really like the look of this white waxed thread. So just keep saddle stitching one through then the other, and just try and pull it tight, try and keep it tight. Normally I do this in my lap, but I'm going to just do this here real quick. So that's the general process of how that goes, and I'm just going to go the whole length, cut it off, knot it, melt that knot down and flatten it nice so it looks pretty, do the next one, and then the next one. Alright, she's all stitched up. Moment of truth, see if our measurements were right. Oh yeah, she slides right in there. Sits nice and tight. I like that. Although I kind of want this guard to fall a little bit lower. Might take some material off, might mess with it. I do like how that sits there though. I'd love if this flap was able to pull back and kind of sit over my guard, and the guard could come lower. So I'm going to mess around with it a little bit and see if I can't get that to sit how I want it. But she does fit nice and not hard to take in and out. So success. Alright, so I adjusted the sheath a little bit. So now, when she sits in there, that lip sits on top of the guard, and that just looks a little bit better in my opinion. So, there's that. And the only thing left to do is test her out.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Don't mind me, I'm just enjoying some cherry Cavendish over here. Hit that like button if you liked the video, and that subscribe button if you want to see more. Let me know in the comments below what you want to see out of this channel. There's a lot of blacksmiths here on YouTube, and everyone kind of does their own thing. So you guys let me know what you want to see out of the Rainy Forge, and I will do my best to make that a reality. Links in the description below for my Facebook, Instagram, and Etsy. Facebook is kind of where I've been posting some major updates about the store. Whenever I'm running a sale over on Etsy, I'll usually give that a shout out over on the Facebook, as well as some memes and whatever's going on. Instagram, I'm trying to do more of a daily story of what goes on behind the scenes here at the Rainy Forge. And Etsy, of course, is where you can buy a knife. So I try and list new stuff every week. Come check it out, and of course the knife that you just saw me make, that'll be listed on Etsy. No clue how long that's going to stay up for, but I do custom work, so if you want something custom made, please reach out to me on the Etsy. And thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.